This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review. I'm your host, Gilad Halpern. Every week we bring you conversations with authors about the books and research and other things that we like. And if you like us, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter by going to our homepage. That's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review. Scroll down to the bottom and click the big red button that says Patreon. Click and support us. Some of you have been doing this for months and years, and we simply cannot thank you enough. This episode is part of a series in partnership with the Institute of Advanced Israel Studies at Brandeis University's Schusterman Center for Israel Studies. My guest today is a literary scholar, a lecturer in literature and digital humanities at the Open University of Israel, a research fellow at Gurion University's Literary Laboratory, as well as the lead fellow at the Institute for Advanced Israel Studies, Dr. Yael Dekel. Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Hello, thank you, Gilad.
So I want to talk about the Literary Laboratory. It employs really novel methods to the study of Hebrew literature that are rooted in the emerging field of digital humanities. But before we get to actually discussing what these methods are, or maybe by way of getting there, of doing that, I'd like you to tell us a little bit about the limitations of the classic methodology that these new methods seek to surpass.
This is a really good question. I think that I might answer it from my personal path in this field or fields. And this might be the easiest way to approach it because I am a literary scholar. I was studying literature like in the regular, normal methods of close reading and reading texts and interpreting the text and so on and so forth. And we know it, right? We know it from university level and also high school sometimes, although now high school is not a good time to speak about high schools, but whatever.
It's not a good benchmark for everything these days.
Yeah. So let's start from university level, though. Whatever. So I was studying literature normally, and then writing my dissertation and all that, close reading, and I actually wrote about war fiction written by Sameh Izhar, and in the regular methods. And then I thought that, like, I had a moment with a friend as we were spending an evening together. I had a moment of like thinking, maybe we can read everything. Maybe if we read everything and map everything, not just like a cartographic map thing, but like catalog everything and think about the characters.
Everything being what? Everything ever written? What do you mean by everything?
On that weird night, yes. But then as I woke up in the morning, I realized that everything everywhere, maybe I'm not qualified, though megalomaniac and so on, maybe I'm not qualified for this. And maybe, I should just narrow down myself for the study of Hebrew literature, which is what I learned. So my training was kind of fits this. And then maybe not Hebrew literature, because poetry, I still think about genres and poetry and prose and questions you ask and the way you think about all the poetry and all the prose maybe kind of stands apart. So I was thinking maybe I should just read the entire Hebrew novel, which is a form, a standing form, a thing that exists, and I should do this.
How many titles are we talking about, roughly?
Around 8,500.
Okay, so
but it's growing every year. And
obviously,
yeah.
But it's not like I'm sure that a parallel of the English language would be completely beyond reach.
This is why it's data, but it's not even big data.
Yeah.
It's like small big data.
Yeah, medium-sized data.
Yeah.
But I wonder whether, despite this relatively small number, over a period of time, I don't know, Hebrew literature studies, have existed for several decades. 8,000 titles is really something that also can be covered in the old methods, right? With close reading and everything. I don't know, that there are probably out there several thousand Hebrew literary scholars
Yeah, so this was my thought, that I don't want a computer to be reading it. I don't want to scan everything and although these are super, valid and existing methods in digital humanities, that there is a computational aspect to the reading process as well. But I thought that I'd like to do a combination of close reading and also a distant reading or a distant approach to everything read by actual readers. And
So maybe you can clarify the difference between close reading and distant reading. I think that close reading is pretty intuitive
it's
to anyone
intuitive.
who's ever studied literature or
Right.
engaged thoughtfully with a literary piece. But how is distant reading different? And like, what is really the added value of distant reading? Because close reading is what gives you really the essence of the text that distant reading does not provide.
Right. So the term distant reading was first coined by scholar Franco Moretti, who wrote about it in the year of 2000, if I remember correctly, in an article titled Conjectures of World Literature, where he writes, he deploys close reading, saying that close reading is really designed to read only to focus on the canon, and that this is actually even a theological activity. It's as if this is sacred, the canon is sacred, we read only this, we interpret only this over and over again. And how many articles have you read about this author or that canonical author? Versus what scholar Margaret Cohen terms the great unread. All of these books, all of these novels that were published and were read by a few, and were kind of left away, in the libraries, or even not that. What about this? This is also a way to look about society, to look about literature, and perpetuating the canon over and over again has something in it that is even not, I can't find the right term, maybe not even ethical in a way. It's something that is not mirroring society.
Because it's overlooking great chunks of human existence.
Right, right. It's mirroring a really small fraction of society, the canonical one, the one that is told. What about all the other?
So that actually changes the angle quite radically of the tools, the toolbox of the literary scholar, from something that I would call perhaps an artistic endeavor, to evaluate the literary qualities, the artistic qualities of a literary text, to a more sociological endeavor, trying to understand what are the undercurrents, sociological undercurrents behind that the creation of the text and what the interpretation of it, etc. It's quite a radical shift, isn't it?
It is, although historiography was always been written, right? The writings of literary history. What is literary history? It was just written based mainly on the canon. So because there were no computers, or computers came into the game late or more recently.
And that is what enabled us to engage in this kind of methodology. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able.
Right. So there is something here that also the tools shape the thinking and so on. So then I approached a literary lab that I saw that was just open in Gurion University with this idea. Dr. Itai Marinberg-Milikovsky, who's the head of the lab, and he liked it, accepted it, and celebrated it. And we wrote a questionnaire that I think that you've answered.
Yes, I filled it in.
How is it for you?
So you basically ask people. There's a website, and you ask people, and you also send it to people, like lay people out there, and ask them to fill in a questionnaire of about 20 pages about a Hebrew novel that they've read recently and still have with them, because it requires you, while you answer the questionnaire, to look at some aspects. And for me, first of all, it was a little difficult for two reasons. I don't read Hebrew novels that much. I read mainly nonfiction for the purposes of this podcast, but also for fun. And also, being the unabashed snob that I am, I prefer to read in English. So the last book that I read in Hebrew that I answered your questionnaire about, I read, I think, about 2 years ago. I absolutely loved it. It's called Sefer Adom, the Red Book. It's a historical novel about. It kind of sounds boring, but actually it's wonderful. It's about the early days of Mapam, the left-wing party in the 1940s and 50s in Israel, and all the little power struggles within it, and the great titans that ran it, and at the same time were very small people. It was it's a wonderful read. But I was also engaging with it critically because I knew I was going to have this conversation with you today, and I was thinking, how the hell can you come up with these questions that are supposed to cover the entire output, the great unread of Hebrew literature? I mean, how do you even try to start to catalog the literary devices, the division into genres? And there's been a lot of experiments in literature over the years. I mean, it's not just like, they're not all the books that you're trying to cover are very, very, it's really a diverse bunch. So enough about me, and now back to you. How do you even approach that endeavor in the first place? Or, trying to map out the questions that would then lead you.
Yeah. So it was my idea, right? So I was thinking about what interests me, right? Maybe if you had come up with a questionnaire, it would have looked different. And I tried to write with Itai Marinberg-Milikovsky, as I mentioned. We tried to write, to compose a questionnaire that about things that interest us, but that also, since we learned literature and we read a lot, and we both really like narratology and the narratological aspect, like what is the novel made of, with devices and narrator and all these terms that you've encountered in the questionnaire. So we're really interested both in form and in content, and there are bibliographical questions that are necessary. What is the published house? What is the length of the book? How many pages is it? Or who's the editor? Because then you can combine, if you imagine it as a platform, like as a database, then you can combine different sorts of data, like the length of the book and something else about the theme. Are historical novels actually longer than other subgenres? So there is the bibliographical part, which makes sense, right? And then there is the narratological part, which also makes sense because every story is narrated by someone, by a narrating entity. Who is this narrated entity? In first person or third person? There are these structural, formal definitions that are relatively stable through time, or that can be reflected on in various writings, in various novels. And then there are the thematic aspect of the questionnaire, which is, well, everything is problematic whenever you think about it twice or three times, or so far we have 1,115 questionnaires in the database.
About different titles?
About
some
around 700 or 800 titles.
Okay, so some of them were repeated quite often.
Yes, but and maybe we'll talk about it later.
Yeah.
Just this. So every novel is different, and there are themes that we might have not included there because we were just not reading such novels as of yet. There was no COVID. There was no. It was before we came up with the questionnaire in 2020, so we didn't really. We couldn't foresee stuff.
Yeah, but those are also probably things that you just weren't aware of.
Right.
I'm thinking, like, as I said, I read nonfiction a lot. So it's not just the scholarly books, but also like narrative nonfiction and things that are really straddle the line between fiction and nonfiction, sort of like a semi-autobiographical, semi-made-up account of the author's life. I mean, how does that, like, I'm trying to think how you just put it all under one umbrella, because it's just, can go in so many different directions. And what it really is, the horizon for this is really my question is. I mean, you're getting all these, an enormous amount of data. As you said, it's not that big, but big enough. And how do you even, like, what do you do with it?
Okay. There is a public aspect and an academic aspect. The academic aspect is basically to write historiographical articles or book about the Hebrew novel. Right now, what I'm doing...
themes and how they develop, not just themes, but all sorts of elements and how they developed over time?
It could go to so many directions. Right now, my direction, together with Professor Uri Rol from the Department of Desert Ecology in Sde Boker, in Gurion University.
Desert ecology.
Yes.
Yeah.
So right now, Uri is interested in, biology and ecology and space and stuff. And, and me too, I guess, through fiction. So we basically analyze the data that has to do with space in the questionnaire, and to see spaces in the Hebrew novel and the shifts of central spaces that were described in the plots of these novels through time. So they're really interesting things to be thinking about. Like, for example, it makes sense that in the Haskalah novel, or in 19th century and beginning of 20th century novel, the place which recurrent the most was Eastern Europe, some Western Europe, and some, the land of Israel, Palestine. But later on, it shifted to Israel, and then the center is Israel. And nowadays, in recent years, there is Israel, of course, because, Hebrew literature, which didn't start with Israel, right? It's important to maybe mention it, that it's a language-based literature. It's not connected to territory or to place. But as Israel was established, then the center...
now it's a national language as well.
Yeah, now it's a national language as well. And still the novels today are placed in Israel, but also many of them in Western Europe and the United States. So there is more than Eastern Europe, for example, and more than other places, and way, way more than North Africa and the Middle East.
So this is one trend that you're interested in, to see how the concept of space in the novel expanded over the years. Or
shifted over the years, yeah. And also within spaces in Israel, what are the proportions of city versus nature, or city versus village? What are the rates of kibbutz? There are so many historiographies of literature of the kibbutz. It's a topic, and to see it on the background of many, many, many other writings as well.
Okay, so that's a literary aspect of it, and you said there was a public aspect as well.
Right. This is the academic aspect.
Yeah.
The public aspect is the aim is to have an open database that people can enter and see according to their interests. It can be teachers, it can be students, it can be just, people who feel like examining the rates of women authors versus men authors in some years, or whatever they're interested in, right? There's the questions about generational relationships. could be nice to have something that is accessible for everyone, just to explore and celebrate Hebrew literature.
I want to go back to Moretti's contribution and talk about the canon.
Hmm.
Because what it does really, I mean, it can do, what your work can do one of two things.
Hmm.
It can either undermine the concept of canon
Hmm.
altogether, say, okay, now we're no longer interested in the canon, therefore it's useless for our purposes as literary scholars. Or it could say, okay, the canon still exists, but maybe we are redrawing its boundaries somehow and rethinking the relationship between the canon and what is non-canonical.
Hmm.
What do you think the implications for the canon as a concept are?
Well, I think the latter is something that I would more feel comfortable with. But I think also that by approaching different sorts of data, we can do different things. Like, for example, we can examine only marginal publishing houses, or not marginal, independent or something, publishing houses, and see their proportion across our readers. Um, as reflected in the questionnaires. Or we can see the years or themes or editors and their implications on topics. What are the topics that are more read, more canonical? We can also see, you asked earlier about the multiple questionnaires for one novel thing. So this also reflects the canon, right? If I have 8 questionnaires about one novel, and so this is the canonical, and this allows for reading the canonical, like, based on its actual readership.
But is it though? I mean, it's can how it invites a question of some other sort, and that is what really makes a canon. Because whether it's just popularity, I mean, it's something that's read by many people, but it has to have another dimension to it, which is that it is, a great Israeli novel, as it were, something that expresses the zeitgeist or some deep currents within society or the culture at a given moment.
And that there's the recognition of the establishment.
Yeah, so this is really what I'm getting at. The recognition of the establishment is something that is quite narrow. I mean, in all sorts of ways, there's been a back and forth and some hand wringing about who decides what a canon is. And in a way, and that brings me to a question about undermining the canon. Your endeavor, maybe unwittingly, because you said you don't subscribe to my suggestion that it is undermining the canon, but I still think that it is, by taking away all the power from the establishment into deciding what's canonical and what isn't.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's also because this is the readers who make these insights, right? It's
Yeah, it's a lot more participatory than before.
Yeah, it's called
Yeah.
citizen science. I'm not comfortable with citizenship nowadays, but whatever. This is it's public science, maybe. So which is new in literary studies. Public science or citizen science is mainly in biology and in nature and science, and where people take pictures of birds and upload them and so on. And in literary studies, this is not a very common method for research. So this is also, I think, taking away some of the position of the scholar, of the historiographer, who knows everything, who makes these these insights and these arguments about literature and society and so on, and posing it in the public, in the readers, in people who actually read the novels.
But you're saying that there is still some place for close reading, like the old school methods of literary studies. Can you maybe say something
Right.
about how the public aspect of it is incorporated into? I mean, how do the two merge
Well,
together?
first, when you read the Sefer Adom and answered the questionnaire, so you read it closely, right?
Mhm.
You didn't just read a paragraph of it, or a sample. You didn't sample it. You read it closely, and so are the other readers. Everything, all of the reading, like, is done through close reading. In the level of analyzing the data, in the level of seeing different aspects of it, this can go to many different directions. Like, for example, to see, to discover a novel and then go back and read it closely, to see through thematic ideas, through the themes that are there, to see maybe something stands out and go back and read the novels, or close read the novels that depict this and that theme.
Mhm.
And so I don't see it as replacing close reading of the scholar as well. If other scholars use it, and I think that they too will read closely some of the novels that they look at through the questionnaires.
Yeah, this whole field of digital humanities is growing and is really on vogue at the moment. And also you said that there's some historical and historiographical aspect to your
Mhm.
inquiries, and I wonder whether there is any contact with other fields in the humanities that are employing digital humanities methodologies, namely history. Is there like cross-pollination between literary digital humanities and other fields in the humanities?
I think that the worldview, or what is similar. Looking at statistics, looking at numbers, seeing data, also visualization, which is something that if you read articles by literary scholars in the past, you don't see visualizations. But across digital humanities, every article, I think, in digital humanities has visualizations. It has, this aspect
That
of,
maps out the data in a visual manner. Is that
right,
what you
that,
mean by visualization?
yeah,
Yeah.
that maps out the data, which is also usually larger,
Because there
bigger.
is like the concept of data is now entered. I
Right.
mean, it was like you didn't need data in an old school literary article, right? I mean,
Um,
you had it, but it wasn't named as such.
Right. It wasn't named as such. There was the structuralism and formalism and older literary schools that were mapping out and thinking about themes and but I don't know as many. I mean, nowadays digital humanities, the one thing that really differentiates between an article in digital humanities and an article in regular humanities would be data and its visualization. Because how can you otherwise explain it?
Yeah,
It's so easy to see with a good graph.
yeah. I wonder whether, and going back to what we mentioned earlier,
Hmm.
about the cutting edge of
Hmm.
Hebrew
Hmm.
literary studies in this sense, because it gives us a somewhat contained and manageable
Hmm.
amount um, of material to work with.
Hmm.
Um, how do you see yourself in relation to literary scholars around the world? As we said, in English, probably it's too open-ended that puts it on a totally different level. But I don't know, maybe, I don't know, Slovenian literary scholars can and are encountering a similar challenges and opportunities to you. Is there some sort of a global network, and maybe a stratified one?
I'm not familiar with the global networks of people like me who want to write the historiography of their respective small language, relatively small literature. I would love to have such a reference group, such a support group, but I know that there is, for example, now a research about the Victorian novel and about literary devices or specific literary devices in the Victorian novel that is a citizen science research. And there was a study by Carina van Delen Oskam, who is a Dutch scholar of digital humanities or computational literary studies. By the way, the subfield is called computational literary studies, and she has written about the literary quality. How do readers perceive literary quality, like canonical, non-canonical, or good and like higher quality and so on, using questionnaires. So
Yeah, I would say, sorry to interrupt here, but I would say that computational is misleading here because it's not the computer that reads the novels and analyzes the data.
mhm,
I mean, we're using a computer
mhm,
to analyze data that basically is being brought in by public or citizen science,
mhm.
right?
Right and wrong. No, not wrong, but right and
And not so right.
and
Yeah.
not so right
Yeah.
because we don't know, or well, my research partners are kind of dreaming about or writing codes based on people's responses on the questionnaires that will help the computer actually fill out a questionnaire about any Hebrew novel that it gets. So training an algorithm to do stuff that actual readers do is moving more towards the computational as you mean it.
Mhm.
I'm not there yet, maybe because I like to read. So it's like if this is my what qualifies me as a person, then it's kind of difficult for me to let it go and to train an algorithm. But yeah. Well, so the computational part might grow in this research. And also not so right because I couldn't have done it without computers.
Obviously.
More than just typing in Word
Mhm.
or more than just, marking a text
No,
and
no, I'm saying
proofreading.
that the word computational suggests that it's the like what you just said about the algorithm doing everything for us,
Mhm.
which is, I think, the case in, um, maybe in sometimes in history we have like a huge amount of documents to go through, of text to go through, and you just want to like map out or pick out
Mhm.
the main events or main
Mhm.
themes of some historical
Mhm.
occurrence,
Mhm.
then you can use the computer to do it. Like, for example, I'm a journalism scholar, and obviously newspapers
Mhm.
is something that has an inordinate amount of text to go through, and computer can certainly make our lives a
Mhm.
lot easier there. Maybe that's why I was taken aback by the word, because for me it relates me back to the algorithm doing everything for
Yeah.
us.
Yeah. But also, mapping out just novels title, just learning about titles. What story do titles say? Moretti has actually an article about it. This is too something that we can't do on our own, and we rather do it with a
Yeah.
computer.
So we said that there's an overall uh, 8,500 titles to go through, more or less.
Until maybe let's talk until 2001, 2021. Sorry,
Okay.
for
No,
this number.
but still,
Can't.
and you
Sorry.
have about 1,100 questionnaires in your uh, in the lab right
Correct.
now. What's it's about, I don't know, or 1,100 questionnaires,
Questionnaires.
about 800
Yeah,
titles.
it's around the 10%.
So about 10%. So
Yeah.
what is really Well, what are you aiming for in order to start drawing big conclusions?
I think that big conclusions can be made based on 10%. Big conclusion can be made based on 10%, even based on 5% of, a language literature novel as a whole. Yeah. It doesn't mean that I don't aim for more, because seeing more would be just nicer. And because once we get numbers into the game, then you always want higher numbers. And still,
no, but it's more. What I was asking, whether it's more than the minimum you were aiming for, and the answer is absolutely yes.
Yeah.
So, what are really the big conclusions that you've been drawing? You said something about the question of space. That's one example. Are there any other things that are evolutions and trends that we've been able to see?
There's so many sorts of data that can be seen in different ways and combining other sorts of data, right? But I think for now, maybe we can look at the themes that recurrent in the Hebrew novel and see how, love is the most recurrent one in so many of the novels. This is the highest rated theme in the questionnaire, after which there is family, and then intergenerational relationships, and then coming of age. These are the, first 4 themes. Then the 5th theme, recurrent theme, is emotional distress. And the 6th is childhood. Then there's death. Then there is marriage. Then there is ethics. Then there is sex and sexuality. And it's so interesting that the 10 recurrent themes that I just mentioned are not so particular, right? They're general. They have as on their own, they're universal. And after which there is wars and Zionism and religion and religious establishment and other more local specific themes. But I think that as a conclusion, to have the 10 first themes as universal
says a lot about the Hebrew novel.
I don't know what it says about the Hebrew novels, but I feel like it says a lot about the Hebrew novel. Right?
Watch this space, as they say.
Yes.
All right. Dr. Yael Dekel, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
And many thanks to Itai Shalom, the manager of TLV1 Studios, and to the Schusterman Center for Israel Studies for their generous support. And now we've got a request, because most of you listen to us on the Apple Podcasts app, and we would like to ask you to please consider writing a review. You too can support us by going to our website and subscribing onto our Patreon campaign. Check out our archive. It has probably more than 1,000 interviews by now. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and join us next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, from us here in Tel Aviv, goodbye.